Eric, welcome back to This Is Horror Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you guys again and chat about horror and being loathsome and transgressive horror, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so it has been around a year since we last spoke. So I want to know, what have the biggest changes for you been in that time, and what were some of the highlights for you in 2024?
Yeah, 2024 was a great year for me professionally. I saw the release of my novella collection, This Skin Was Once Mine and Other Disturbances from Titan Books, which I thought was very well received. And I think that's when we last talked about that book. Did we talk about that book? Yeah, I
We
think we did.
certainly did, yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it was one of the best short story collections of the past year.
Thank
And,
you. Thank
you
you.
know, uh, a lot of those stories are still resonating with me today, and I think about them a lot. So,
Oh,
yeah,
thank
it's
you.
a
That means a
marvelous
lot.
collection.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was very honored that that book came out. Um, I, looking back professionally, I was able to go to AuthorCon, which is an amazing convention in Virginia that's helmed by Brian Keene, who's an incredible horror author. And I was a guest of honor for that event. And I mean, probably the biggest thing that happened, well, two big things happened since we last talked. I hinted at it, I think, the last time we did an interview, but I was able to finally announce my deal with Norman Reedus and Blackstone. My book At Dark I Become Loathsome, which is now coming out January 28th this month from Blackstone, more specifically from Norman's imprint at Blackstone called Big Bald Head. That was a huge, amazing amazing announcement that I was able to do this past year in 2024. Um, and the reception for that was so incredible from the horror community. Everyone really seemed like they were putting a lot of goodwill behind me and just rallying around me and celebrating my accomplishment. So that was an amazing moment for me. And then next, I announced my new deal with Saga Press, an imprint of Simon and Schuster. I'll be working with editor Tim O'Connell on a brand new horror novel that he commissioned for me, and that's called Wretch. Wretch. It's my first novel with only just one word in the title, so that's like character development. That's big, big moves for me. Um, So yeah, I'm really excited about that. That book is scheduled to come out within a couple years. I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, I feel like 2024 was a great year professionally. A lot of things happening behind the scenes. Maybe not a lot of stuff in front of the camera yet that I'm not, just not able to talk about yet. But um, I feel like the stuff that I was able to announce and kind of clue my readers into was really special. And um, it was kind of, even though I had those big announcements, like it was a relatively quiet year somewhat, in that I only had one book that came out, which is The Skin Was Once Mine. I had another novel that was slated to come out in the fall of 2024, but we unfortunately had to like push that back a little bit just due to publishing scheduling conflicts. But that being said, I am really proud of the book I put out last year, and people seem to be really connecting with it. The people who need it are reading it, which is always so important. And I'm really looking forward to At Dark I Become Loathsome finally coming out. It's been a long time coming to announce the book and then to write it, to get it on the bookshelf, and it's just really exciting. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Goodness, there's so much that we now need to talk about. And I mean, of course, you have said, and we know that you have so many different books that are forthcoming. You mentioned the Saga Press novel, Wretch. You, of course, have in a matter of weeks at Dark I Become Loathsome. And I know too that you have a trilogy
Yes.
coming from Titan Books. I'm wondering, in terms of the scheduling and the publishing, is that something that you get involved in terms of saying when different things will come out? Is it a call that the publisher makes? Is it something your agent gets involved in? Do the publishing houses consider when other titles are coming out? So Titan see, okay, well, Saga have this one coming out. Norman Reedus has that one. Let's slot it in there. How does it all work for you?
It's a bit of a goat rope sometimes. It's a bit of a delicate dance with some of these publishers, just because the issue was for a little bit that I have a lot of different books with different publishers. I am working primarily with Titan Books on, my short story collections and then the trilogy that's coming out. But then Blackstone approached us, Norman Reedus approached us, and that's an opportunity I just could not refuse. So we signed a deal with them, and then they had to kind of finagle when we were going to release that book. And that was a discussion with Titan that, usually through my agent, that we kind of decide like what's the best course of action. And then the trilogy coming out, we kind of have it structured in a way now where, um, the Saga Press book, I'm hoping will come out either next year or the year after. We're trying to slot it in between some of the trilogy that's coming out, the three books in that trilogy. For right now, it was going to be like the trilogy was just going to be back to back to back. But knowing how dark and depraved and unsettling the trilogy is in general, I really want to give more space to each book. And we're hoping to spread it out a little bit more. And that being said, we're hoping to slot the Saga book in a little bit sooner. But if that doesn't happen, the Saga book will probably come out like 2027 or 2028. But it is written and it's done. And I actually just finished developmental edits on it today. So I'm really happy. It's been like accepted by my editor, and we're like going into copy edits soon. So it's really exciting. But like I said, it is like a delicate dance between all these different publishers. The goal, obviously, is to partner with one publishing house in particular and have that be like my literary home. But I'm open to like I'm actually like really interested in adopting the Josh Mallerman method of like publishing the big literary horror novels with like the big five press, and then working with like the smaller independent presses for like chapbooks or novellas or little short story collections. I feel like Josh has really perfected the art of dabbling in both the traditional publishing space, like with the big five, like he's housed at Del Rey, but also works with like Earthling and like all these other publishing places that are like in the more independent circuit. So I really admire that, and I actually think about Josh quite a bit, like in his career and his longevity in general, how he's able to like publish so much. And when I talked to him last, I know that he has like all of these books slated to come out, but he has them like in his office, just like in drawers, like all of these books that have already been written. And it's kind of like I've kind of mimicked him in a lot of ways. Like I have all of these drafts of books like ready to go on my hard drive on my computer, and we're putting out Loathsome obviously at the end of this month in January, but then in September of this year, we're putting out the first book of the Burnt Sparrow trilogy, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think I'm really proud of that book, and in general, I think it's one of the best things I've ever written. We've had a really great early response from Paul Tremblay, which gives me like a lot of hope. So that being said, like I think about Josh a lot just in general and how he's able to kind of go back and forth between the traditional publishing model of like working with Del Rey and then working with the small little independent publishing houses. I feel like that's kind of the sweet spot that I want to fall into as well.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people seem to be dabbling with these days. And, it seemed, let's say, 10 years ago that very much going for a big publisher was the way that people wanted to go, what they were aspiring for. And then I feel what maybe 5 or so years ago, there was a great resurgence of self publishing and independent publishing. And you saw people like Adam Neville and David Moody in the UK, who had previously been traditionally published, going more this kind of indie self-publishing route. But
Mhm.
now it seems to be the time of the hybrid, for want of better phrasing, where you've got people who they're doing a little bit independently or with a small press, and a little bit with the big 4 or 5. I'm not sure how many it is right now, but the point is that they're then getting the benefits of both, and they're getting certainly the creative freedom and the chances that you're able to take when you're with a smaller publishing house. But to say that to you is somewhat ironic, because you seem to have creative freedom whoever you publish with,
I
which
really do. I've reached a point, and I don't know if it's because of the success of books like Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and You've Lost a Lot of Blood and the other books that I've published, but um, I've had kind of like carte blanche when I go to these publishing houses. Like, they're like, write us whatever you want to write, and we'll take a look at it, and they seem pretty game. Um, and then that with that in mind, I've really been amazed at how much creative control I've had with cover art, because I know that that's not the case with a lot of artists, a lot of authors who work with in the traditional publishing model. I know like a lot of authors kind of get the email where it's like, this is the cover we're going with, this is what sales they're really excited about. The sales team wants to go with this design, so this is what we're going with. But um, I've I really haven't had that interaction yet with a publisher. In fact, Blackstone really kind of let me do a lot of creative direction with this cover for At Dark I Become Loathsome, the US cover. There's also a Titan, a UK edition that's coming out that I had some, input in, not as much as I did with the Blackstone edition. Um, but I've it's been such an honor to be able to express myself the way I feel, the way I really want my art to be represented in the world, and how I want it to be perceived on the bookshelf. So it's really special, and it's really a unique experience. I feel like that not a lot of authors get to experience what I've experienced.
Hmm. It's like you're creating a brand,
Yeah,
and it's I think now, especially if you're prolific, it's really good to kind of branch out and do a hybrid model. But you really want to create a brand uh that lets people know your the range. Usually you think of a brand as something that's very specific and very narrow brand, narrow banded. But I think with writers, it a brand allows you to show your range. I mean, look at Joe Lansdale; he can write anything,
yeah.
but it's a Joe Lansdale story. It's the
Totally.
same thing when you get an Eric LaRocca book. You can write anything, but it's an Eric LaRocca story. And
That
so
means a lot. Thank you.
yeah, and
Thank you.
creating that brand, I think that, Mallerman's done it, you're doing it. It's important. It's and it takes time. It takes a lot of work, but kudos to you. I mean, I love that kind of stuff.
Thank you. I do too. I really admire that. That means a lot that you said that, Bob. Thank you. I really admire the authors that have what you're talking about. Like Clive Barker obviously is a huge influence for me. Even Dennis Cooper, who's an amazing, like more literary author, but also has like a lot of disturbing horror elements. Chuck Palahniuk is a huge inspiration for me. I love Chuck with my whole soul. Like I love that man so much. And I look to him for inspiration quite a bit. And it's the same thing. Like, it's a Chuck Palahniuk story novel when you're reading it. And I think branding is so important for authors, and maybe a lot of up and coming authors don't think about that a lot when they sign with like a publisher, but it's something that you really should be thinking about, at least in the back of your mind, um, when you're collaborating with these publishers, because you want to develop a distinct voice in your writing and also the way in which your stories are being presented to the public. So the art is very important. At least the art has always been really important to me, like the artwork on the cover. And for a while, a lot of my artwork was very, painting a lot of like syrupy, dripping sort of threads. And now with that Dark I Become Loathsome, the US edition from Blackstone, when I sent the cover to one of my really good friends, he immediately texted back and he was like, "It's like your paintings have finally come to life. It's this beautiful statue." For anyone who hasn't seen the cover, it's this beautiful red statue, just like with this bright red light thrown on it. And the head is like missing the top half, and its mouth is kind of corroded away. And there's this like hand going into the mouth and another hand going into the top of the head. And um, it looks so surreal. It has that surreal quality that a lot of my covers had, but it's more lifelike and it's more visceral, I think. So it's important to have that brand, but it's also important to like surprise people with new things and be like, oh, I can also do this. Because that's something I think about a lot too.
I think it might be your best cover in terms of matching and perfectly encapsulating what the book is about. I mean, there's something very sexual and provocative about it, but there's a real violence and a kind of Barker like sinister foreboding. It just seems to have so much in this one arresting image. And yeah, to have it predominantly red and black with the text in white couldn't have been better. And yeah, those hands. I mean, honestly, what's going on there? It could be forceful. It could be consensual.
Yep.
It could be a little bit from here, a little bit from there. There's such a lot of ambiguity, but it's powerful and it really does work for what you've delivered here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I should note for listeners that the artwork was designed by Sarah Sitkin, who's an amazing visual artist, I believe based in LA. And she designed, I could be wrong about the LA thing, I think that's where she's from. Um, and she designed the cover art for Gretchen Folker Martin's Manhunt and Gretchen's Cuckoo. So when I saw those covers, I was immediately just drawn to them, and I thought, oh man, like I would love to collaborate with her on something. And I pitched it to Blackstone, and they were immediately like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. So there's never been any question with Blackstone. They've been just a dream to work with, and just amazing collaborators. And it's I can't sing their praises enough. I really feel like they've put a lot of goodwill and marketing muscle behind this book in particular, which really it shouldn't surprise me, but it does, only because it's such a transgressive book, and it's such a difficult book to it's not easily digestible, I feel like, in a lot of ways. Um, but I could be wrong. Some people have said that it's one of my more like accessible and approachable books, but some of the material in there, I feel like it's deliberately provocative and deliberately upsetting. So I'm just interested to hear how it goes over with folks.
Yeah, while I was reading this, I thought, wow, this is a bold title, BOLD, given the name of the publication, for Norman Reedus and Blackstone to decide to open a publishing line with. I mean, this is not messing about.
Yeah,
This is, I don't know if I would say it's your most accessible book. For me, it was like, wow, there are you are not, goodness, how do we even put it, conforming to the norms.
yeah,
You are giving something that is so purely you, and I think people are going to have a reaction to it.
mm,
Whatever that reaction is, they will be affected, they will react. You're not going to walk away from this being like, oh, it was all right. No, 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 you are going to feel something. And so I want to know, I mean, you have alluded to this a little bit. It seems like you had a lot of freedom in terms of when they said that they wanted you to write something to open the publication. Now, I assume there wasn't much guidance given in terms of what they wanted. It was just, we want a story from you. But then when your editor and your agent and whoever saw it to begin with read it, I want to know what their reaction was, because, as I say, bold is the word that comes to mind. To open your publication, your publishing house with that. I don't even know where you go from there, because this
right.
is a statement.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, the reception for the book, like, within Blackstone, has been really, really positive, and I know that they're 100% behind this title. When we pitched the book, so back up to like 2021, things have gotten worse since we last spoke, had just come out. It was going viral on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. And I get an email one day from someone who says that he's Norman Reedus's agent. And I'm like, yeah, right. Okay, whatever. And I just send it to my manager, Brian, and I said, do you mind looking into this and just seeing what this like what this guy's interested in? I sent him the email, and he was like, yeah, sure, like, I'll take care of it. So a couple days pass, and I just think to myself, like, oh, we're never going to hear back from him, like, because that's how kind of the industry is sometimes, and with like filmmaking and like that sort of crowd, like, you get ghosted quite a bit, and I've been ghosted like a lot with Hollywood. So it's kind of like, who knows what's going to happen. But Ryan eventually gets back in touch with me, and he's like, yeah, no, it's legit, like, Norman Reedus is a huge fan of your work and would love to open his imprint at Blackstone with one of your books. And I mean, it was such a surreal moment. It was so incredible to know that, like, a celebrity like Norman Reedus was not only a fan of my work, but wanted to collaborate with me and work with me on something. And he optioned the book before it was even written, which was such an amazing gesture of goodwill, it felt like. So we got the contracts all squared away, and that was relatively pretty easy. And then it came time to like pitching the book, and then eventually like writing the thing. And I had this idea for quite some time. In fact, um, I kind of allude to it a little bit in Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. One of the characters mentions to the other character how she's watching a television program about an organization in Asia that buries you alive for like a transformative rebirth experience. Like that's in Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, because I had encountered this article about these live burials that were happening in different cultures that these organizations would hold in order to like purify you and give you this like transformative rebirth process. And it just completely fascinated me. So I referenced it in Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. And from there, I knew I wanted to incorporate it as like the main premise of a larger piece of work. And the concept came to me pretty organically once I had that background and once I had that backdrop that I could like set the scene against. Um, and from there, I knew I wanted it to be like a really depraved, disturbing character study where we follow the descent of one man who undergoes a significant amount of loss in a short period of time. And yeah, from there, it seemed like a really like a no-brainer thing to pitch Blackstone, because to me it was something that could be like a perfect vehicle for Norman in general. I see him, he's a remarkable actor, of course, but he has a brutality to him that's really fascinating. He's very very rugged, very violent in some ways, but he has like a beautiful tenderness and a sensitivity to his performances that are just so, it's why we watch him. It's why we're captivated every time he appears on screen. So I feel like he would be the perfect person to play the main protagonist of this book, Ashley. I feel like he would be the perfect choice for it. Whether he will or not, I'm not certain. He has optioned the book as a film, so that's really exciting. His production company has optioned it, rather. So that's wonderful. But from there, I took like a year or so and wrote the manuscript and then submitted it to Blackstone. And from there, once you have the manuscript accepted by Blackstone, it's kind of interesting how they do things over there. They pair you with an editor that is a freelance editor, not necessarily an employee of Blackstone, but rather an outside editor that they commission to work on the project with you. So you have an editor in house that kind of oversees the whole process, but you're collaborating with someone who's not necessarily a full-time employee of Blackstone. So I was paired with a brilliant woman named Melissa Ann Singer, who was the former senior editor of Tor. She worked there for many, 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 many years, and had worked with incredible authors like Daniel Kraus, who the book is dedicated to, and she even worked with Robert Bloch, the author of Psycho. So she's like a legend. And she really brought the book to a whole new level. The first draft of the book was obviously pretty rough, like all first drafts are, and I had lost my way with a couple of plot threads, and the character development could have been a lot stronger, and she really brought all that out in the subsequent drafts that we did. We did a couple drafts together, and it was brilliant to work with her. It was just such a smooth, organic sort of process, and her critiques were always very, very thoughtful, very insightful, but never like totally prescriptive, never like you have to do it like this or else, which is, I kind of prefer like a gentle approach when I'm working with an editor. And she was very, very gentle, very wonderful to work with. She really understands narrative and character and story, and um, like I said, she's just a legend. So it was a joy to work with her and bring out certain elements of the plot more, refine more of the character development. And once all of that was done, it went into like the machine of Blackstone, and from there it's just been such an amazing process. I mean, like I said, they have really spared no expense with marketing this book and getting it in front of the right people. They really, I feel very validated that they are very much behind me. So it's been a delight to partner with them and with Norman. I can't speak highly enough about all of them.
Yeah, have you had any personal interactions with Norman? Or if not yet, then have you been able to find out what he personally thinks about this book? I don't know if you've been given a message from him at all.
Yeah, so I haven't like officially met him yet, unfortunately. I'm really bummed about that because I obviously really want to meet him. Just to thank him for this opportunity and really you know, um, just thank him for this incredible opportunity, this platform that he gave me. So I haven't met him, but I have heard that he is a huge fan of the cover art that we went with, loves the cover. Um, and we've kind of like interacted a little bit like on social media. Like he's retweeted my stuff. He follows me on Twitter and Instagram. And he's reposted my things like in his stories. He's liked my photos. I think he's even liked photos that weren't pertaining to At Dark I Become Loathsome. So he just seems like a really genuine, sweet person. And I I like I said, like I haven't met him, but I really, really like him. Like he just seems like a very genuine person just in general.
Yeah, and I can totally imagine him playing the protagonist, playing Ashley Lutin, if
Yeah.
this, well, hopefully when, given that it's been commissioned by his own company, when it
Right.
becomes a movie. Um, I'm kind of conditioned to always say if because I know how
Yeah.
fickle Hollywood and the movie world can be. So it's a strong if given what's happened. But goodness, like I want to see this, and I imagine that it would be shot in a very kind of dark, almost old school way. Like, I don't think, this is not going to be a bright, modern cinema piece, or almost something of the techniques of John Carpenter, or perhaps like early David Lynch. I could really imagine doing justice to this in terms of the cinematography.
Yeah, very Lynchian, I feel like, or even maybe like Lars von Trier. Like I'm a big fan of his work. I feel like he'd do like a really um, brutal job with this film. I also love the director of like Titan and Raw. I'm like obsessed with her, Julia Ducournau. And then the director of The Substance, Coralie Faragiat. I don't know how you pronounce the name, but they're both incredible directors. It would be just amazing to collaborate with any of them at some point. And I mean, you never know. Hollywood, like I said, it's very very fickle, very difficult to kind of predict where things go. You get ghosted. Um, Things maybe they're going one minute, they're not going the next. But um, the fact that I have Norman Reedus on my side, I feel a little bit protected. I feel like I've got ammunition behind me a little bit.
Hmm. The writing is very cinematic. The I was getting imagery that was very vivid, which is strange for a novel that is very introspective as well. But the especially your exterior scenes, the abandoned areas, the just the whole aesthetic of that. It felt like it felt authentic. It felt um it was very very vivid,
Thank
and
you.
I could see this going into a movie that would be very dark, not obviously dark, but shot dark,
Yeah,
shot dim, um, and dare I say, even it would probably work really good in black and white,
that'd be
but
amazing.
we
Yeah,
wouldn't be able to see all the yeah
all the gore.
yeah
Could you imagine if it was shot in black and white, but there were also flashes of red? If you could somehow shoot it in black and white and red,
That'd be amazing.
yeah.
Mhm. Norman, if you're listening, do
I
that.
was about to say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Norman, help us out, Norman.
Yeah, yeah, just sling it out there, black and white with slashes of red. Yeah,
Yeah, that would you gave me an idea. I might
yeah.
have to give you like a cut of the royalties for the film.
I mean, you're generous enough as it is, but please use that idea. Please pass it on, you
Yeah,
know?
pass it on, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely will.
Yeah.
Definitely will.
Yeah. But I mean, you said about how much the marketing team has put into this. And I mean, that was certainly something I noticed when I was looking at the Goodreads. It's like, hang on a minute, this book is not even out yet. And when I looked yesterday, so this may now be old information, it had 211 ratings and 137 reviews. I mean, an author would be happy with that in the opening week. A lot
Yeah.
of people listening are like, the opening month. Maybe there's some people who are like, I'd just be happy with that, full stop. So
Right.
I want to know. I mean, how has that happened? How have they got it to so many people, and not just got it to people, but these people are reviewing it, they're rating it, they're talking about it. I don't feel that I've seen so many reviews when a book is not even out yet.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Like I said, I can't quite fathom how they've put so much goodwill and effort behind this title when it's so dark and transgressive and not really like easily marketable. At least I don't think it's an easily marketable book. Maybe they feel differently. Obviously, they're doing things that I could never do just like on my own. I mean, they did so much in the beginning and throughout up until release. I mean, there's still like amazing news coming in like pretty much every day about this title, and reviews coming in from like the big trade outlets. Barnes and Noble picked it as one of the best books of January 2025, which is a big coup. I felt like that was a big win. And then today I got an email from like the president of Blackstone that the book is one of the best horror titles of Kobo books for January, which is awesome. So that's been incredible. There's going to be like a really great like deal in February for the ebook on a specific retailer site. We just haven't announced it yet. But yeah, it's just it's insane and it's crazy. I'm just so honored that they have seen fit to put so much marketing muscle behind a book that is so gnarly and so like unabashedly queer and grotesque. It like restores my faith a lot in publishing in general because it's like it seems like a book that they would kind of just release and see what happens and hopefully get word of mouth, but they're really putting a lot of effort into this title, and they've done so much for me and for my writing career. Like I owe a lot to them.
Okay, this is probably not a question that you've had before, but talking about it being unabashedly queer, which it absolutely is. When I was reading it, I noticed that you were using the adjective for said, queerly said, quite a lot. And I thought, is this deliberate? Is this like a nod to the queer community, or are you just really fond of this adjective?
I
It's
mean,
not an
probably,
adjective, it's an adverb. I
yeah.
apologize to everyone.
I mean, probably a little bit of both. I mean, I grew up reading so much horror, but a lot of it was very heterosexual, very heteronormative, and queer characters were just not a part of the focus whatsoever. If there were queer characters, they were coded. If there was any hint of sexuality, like, different kinds of sexuality, it was very, very um, like masked. It wasn't like in your face. It wasn't flagrant. So that being said, I have always been really interested in just presenting unabashedly queer material and queer characters. I feel it's an honor to be able to write, open, or struggling with their sexuality queer characters like Ashley. I feel like it's just part of my DNA to write that, and I wouldn't know how to write really anything else. And I feel like people really resonate with that, or at least the people that are supposed to resonate with it do. It resonates with them. So it's really special, I feel like.
Yeah, there's so much struggle within Ashley, like related to love, related to sexual desires, related to violent desires, and even relating to and pertaining to his own view of himself. And I feel that, we talk about story as conflict, and there is conflict in every line. This isn't just conflict on every page, but it is part of the fabric of this book. And so, I mean, if people want an exercise in terms of how to write stories, or if they want, I should say, an illustrative guide, it is this book. I mean, I said last year that the book that I felt really made a massive impact and will be remembered for years to come is Incidents Around the House by Josh Malaman. But when I read this book, and it seems ridiculous to be saying this on January the 11th, I was like, I think At Dark I Become Loathsome might be, it could be the book that changes things in 2025. I realize the absurdity of this statement to be like, what? He's trying to announce a book of the year 11 days in that he finished on the 2nd of January. But I mean, goodness, if this is a statement of what's to come in 2025, then as the cliche goes, we're eating good.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I'm honored and feel a bit of pressure from that, but I appreciate it. I feel like everyone there are so many incredible writers in horror that putting out such compelling work that is changing the landscape of horror fiction. And I feel like, I don't know, I was looking at so many anticipated lists of 2025, and it feels like every single book in horror that's being listed, like, it sounds like a banger. Like every single book, like, you've got Clay McLeod Chapman's book that just came out. That's a banger. I read that early. Um, Chuck Wendig's upcoming book, The Staircase in the Woods, that sounds incredible. Rachel Harrison has a book coming out in the fall this year. Play Nice, that sounds amazing. I mean, there's so many iconic authors putting out such compelling material, and it's just an honor to be on the bookshelf alongside them. It's really special, I feel.
You
Yeah.
mentioned reading Clay's book, and I mean, you read a hell of a lot of books. You blurb a lot of books. So, just as a little side tangent, and then Bob will jump in. So, apologies for cutting you off there. But I want to know what does your reading look like in terms of where are you fitting that in with all the things that you're doing?
I've honestly had to close for blurbs lately just because I am getting kind of inundated with requests, and I hate letting people down, but it's just impossible to read everything, and um it's just not sustainable. So I feel really bad when people DM me or reach out to my agent and ask if I can read and blurb their work, but I want to do their work justice, and I don't want to like, you know, spend less time on a book than I need. You know what I mean? So it's important to me to be able to read a book like at my leisure and enjoy it and really think about what I want to say about it and be have craft like a meaningful blurb. Um, so that being said, I did kind of close for blurbs recently. But as far as like how I fit it in, I'm really privileged in that I'm able to kind of just like write and read for a living, which is brilliant, and I love that. I've been wanting to have this lifestyle for many, many years, and it's finally here, and I'm just savoring it, to be honest. Like it's brilliant to be able to wake up every day and think, all right, I'm going to read for like 2 or 3 hours, and then I'm going to go sit and write at the computer for 4 or 5. Um, and it's a luxury I know that a lot of people don't have, but um, it's wonderful to be able to be so creative and have a lifestyle that like caters to my creativity. Um, that being said, I am doing like a lot of events in the coming months. Like I'm doing a little book tour at the end of this month. I'm doing another tour in February with a couple other horror authors in New England. I'm doing a lot of events over like spring and summer, and then the fall I'm like going to a lot of places for the Burnt Sparrow book that's coming out. So I definitely have a lot more on my plate this year than I've had in previous years. So I'm interested to see how my reading habits change. I mean, I can read while I'm traveling if I'm like on a plane or, um, on the train or something. But um, yeah, I'm just interested to see how much reading I get done this year because I'm like a little bit busier than I've been normally. So.
Yeah, do you listen to many audiobooks at all, or is it purely reading physical and ebooks? And regardless of your answer to that, have you heard the audiobook for At Dark I Become Loathsome? Because it is a fantastically narrated book. He is
Oh,
so perfect.
that's great to hear. I honestly haven't heard it yet. I haven't heard it. So I picked out the narrator specifically after hearing him audition, and I knew immediately that's who I wanted to narrate the book. I thought he was perfect. I thought he kind of captured the essence of the character so masterfully with just like that kind of dark, brooding atmosphere, but also had like this like tenderness to him, the same way like Norman Reedus has that sensitivity to him. So yeah, I knew I wanted him to be the narrator for this book, but sadly I haven't read it yet. I don't listen to audiobooks too often, to be honest. Not that I have anything against them. I just don't listen to them. If I'm like doing chores around my apartment, like I'll just put on music or something. It's hard for me to really when I'm reading and, listening to things, like if I'm listening to a book, I really want to listen to it. And I feel like if I'm doing chores or like, doing laundry or unloading the dishwasher, like I'm not really giving it the attention I need to give it in order to fully grasp what's going on. And I feel like I'll miss things. I've tried doing it a couple times and it just never works for me. So instead I just like put on music. So um yeah, I pretty much just only read like on my iPad, or I buy a lot of like physical books. I love physical media. So I'm like definitely a collector.
Yeah, well, I can certainly confirm that the narrator that you got for this one, he does the entire thing brilliantly. And
Wow, that's
as
great.
Bob knows, and probably people who have listened to this as horror for long enough, I'm very particular with narrators. But yeah, he created a banger. It's absolutely brilliant.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much for telling me. I need to write to Blackstone and maybe see if they can send me the file or something, or I'll just buy it.
I'm sure that they can send it you.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll send it to me
Yeah,
eventually.
yeah.
I wanted to go back to what you said that horror is changing, and because I've been harping on this for a while, but about writing fearlessly, horror is changing. Um, we have gotten horror to a point to where it is at an all time high. I think that it's bigger now than it's ever been in my lifetime, and I've been through. This is the third boom horror that I've been through. Though the earliest one I was very young, but I've lived through it, and it has never been more popular than it is right now. And when I talk about people being fearless, and then I read your book, and I'm like, fuck, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're swinging for the fences right out of the gate. And if people are listening to this and you want to know, hey, this is what it's going to take to stand up, you need to read this book, because this is writing fearlessly. This is peeling the blinders back and going after it. And this is the way that you're going to stand out. And it's also a way, going back to what we're talking about, brand. It's also a way to brand. And so, yeah, this is, the horror landscape is changing. It's changing for the better. I
Mhm.
think we're in for probably at least 3 to 4 more years of this, and things will inevitably go back to, something else will become popular. But we
Yeah,
need to ride this wave before they start putting supernatural suspense on the spines again instead of horror. So it's
yeah.
we're at a great time for horror, and for horror movies, horror fiction, the whole thing, and just fucking write fearlessly. You did it.
Thank you so much, Bob. That means a lot. I totally agree with everything you said. I mean, we really are in a boom of horror right now, and it is better than it ever was. I think it's very diverse. Um, Obviously, there's room for improvement with any sort of diversity and marginalized voices. We can always bring more to the table, and we should bring more voices to the table. That being said, it's so much better than it was when I was growing up and reading horror fiction in like the early 2000s, early 2010s. I feel like especially LGBTQ plus horror has really boomed over the past couple years, and we have incredible authors like Haley Piper and Gretchen Felker Martin, Alison Rumfitt, David Demchuk, Joe Koch, like the list goes on and on. Like we have so many incredible LGBTQ plus authors creating remarkable work, and um, it's wonderful that I get to call these people peers and colleagues and also friends. Like it's so special, and it makes me excited about what's to come. Like what horror is always like it's I think it was Dario Argento who said like horror is always like shedding its skin and always like transforming. So I'm always curious to know like what the next transformation is going to be. I'm always curious to know like how it's going to evolve and compel people to pick up new books by newer writers. I think that's really amazing.
Hmm. Considering the I guess worldwide national conservative philosophy that's going around, I think it's real important that we maintain, our voice. Our voice is our strength, and conservatives don't like what horror does.
Hmm.
They don't like it. They wish they could control it. Let's put it to you like that. It's They don't like it because they can't control the narrative.
Yeah.
And anytime, to me, I'm very anti-conservative. Anytime you can piss off a conservative, fucking let's do it. You know, And so that's, if you want to look at it from a political stance, yeah, that's definitely a way to look at it. But it's also, bringing the A game and letting people know there's more to horror than just what they've read before. It's
Yeah,
it's it's changing. It's a totally different landscape now, and I think more and more people are getting into it. It's just it's phenomenal what's happening.
I agree. I agree. I'm really lucky, and I get a lot of messages from like younger up and coming horror authors who are queer, or just readers in general who are queer, and they're so excited to see so much queer horror material on the shelves. And I get that. Like I'm so honored that I'm able to be on the shelf and have them reach for one of my books and be that gateway for them that leads them to another book by like Gretchen or by Haley or something. Like, it's just it's such a rewarding experience to be able to have that and to be that for people the way like Clive Barker was for me when I was growing up, or Poppy Z. Bright. Like those writers were the portals to the other world for me, and they influenced me a great deal. So
So I want to get into some of these specifics pertaining to At Dark I Become Loathsome. And I mean, in many ways, this is both a story of grief and a love story. And I mean, both elements are so effective and feel so deeply personal. Now, I know that we've previously spoken about your relationships and love before, but perhaps something we haven't spoken a lot about are your own experiences with grief. So I wondered if we could start there.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a heavy place to start,
Yeah,
but let's
nice.
start there.
Here we go. To
We're
begin,
starting in at the deep
let's
end.
start with grief.
Let's start with death. Let's just start there. Yeah, no. I My experience with grief, I lost someone very, very close to me at a very young age. Someone who was a mentor to me, a really good friend, and she passed away from breast cancer. And it was a very traumatic experience for me at a young age. I was like maybe 13 or 14 when that happened. Um, and I remember how much that experience kind of shaped me and how much it gave it, obviously, like the sorrow that came with it, but also the anger and the anguish and the discomfort of losing someone so that I felt like so connected to, so attached to. It really was like a defining moment for me. And in a lot of ways, I think that this person's passing really influenced a lot of my writing, um, especially a lot of my work, because a lot of my work revolves around like uh, cancer, and how like there's this kind of like cancer that's eating away at the world in general in what I'm writing, but also like the literal cancer of this disease inside a person. Um, and I feel like that experience at such a young age, I feel like it really fucked with me quite a bit and made me acknowledge things about the world that like were uncomfortable truths, and really made me question like my own mortality. Cancer for me is very, very frightening, and something I think about probably more than I should. And it figures pretty heavily in my work. I don't know if we want to go into like spoiler territory with this discussion. I don't know if that's is that okay?
I think as long as we put a warning, so I guess we are now warning people that a spoiler is about to occur, and to find out when it ends, as we are not Nostradamus, you'll have to check the show notes to see whether you need to fast forward 5 or 10 minutes or however long.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to spoil too much for this book, and maybe we should just keep it, um, non-spoilery. But just in general, there is a section of text in this book where we go there. There are two stories kind of nested, two tangents nested within this book, and one of them deals a lot with cancer, and more specifically and more grotesquely, like the fetishization of cancer and uh, terminal illness as like a kind of kink. Um, that being said, it seemed like something. It just seemed like something very very grotesque, something that would kind of rot away at this person, Ashley, this protagonist. Like, he is so infatuated with this story about decay and death. Um, it seemed like the perfect kind of building for him as a character. That being said, like, just my fascination with decay and entropy, I feel like it really was influenced from a very early age from losing that friend I had, to something so malignant and something so awful. Um, I look back and I remember kind of watching that person waste away and just kind of become something else. And it was one of the most like horrifying things I've ever seen in my life. And um, that to me is like the real horror of like humanity and what it means to be alive, that like we're all subject to entropy and decay eventually, and we have no say over it. And not to get too gloomy, but like it's coming for us no matter what. And that to me is like really really frightening, and that upsets me. And I always think like when I'm writing, I want to write from the wellspring of what makes me uncomfortable. I always want to write from what disturbs me, what actually affects me, and what changes me when I interact with it. And to me, this particular tangent that I'm talking about in the novel, with regard to like Victor and Tandy, their story, um, it definitely made me very, very uncomfortable, and it seemed like the perfect sort of tangent to go on in this book, and it was always aligned specifically with this story in general. It wasn't just like inserted in here. It was always like thoughtfully put in this narrative. Um, we had to like skirts like change a few things around to make it more sound and more structurally coherent, but that tangent was always a part of this book and was always something I really wanted to explore. So yeah, just to answer your question, the grief figures heavily in this story because it's one of my formative memories. And I definitely am someone who imagines what it's going to be like when I lose other loved ones, like my partner or my parents, the people that I really, really care about and really adore. It's something that I ruminate on probably more than I should, because it really disturbs me and frightens me. And um, I think that's really what writers, especially horror writers, I feel like we should write from that kind of that source of discomfort, of what really affects us and makes us sort of squirm and makes us uncomfortable.
So once again, there's so many topics that we could jump into, and I mean, two things I definitely want to explore are stories within the story, and then perhaps now forbidden kinks and forbidden fetishes, and that is something that I think permeates all of your work. I mean, in the previous collection, the tale that immediately springs to mind is the one in which there's a gentleman who's inserting bits of glass inside himself.
Mhm.
And I mean, here you've taken cancer, which I think for many people is the scariest thing because it creeps up on you. You can have it and you're not even aware of it.
Yeah,
And if you don't find out about it fast enough, it's over. It
yeah.
can't be treated. And so to then take that and to turn that into a kink, I mean, it's such an Eric LaRocca thing. It's like, right, how can we just take this to its ultimate form of forbidden fetish? And there it is. And goodness, there's something so troubling in reading that section, but also so alluring in terms of the psychology and what is going on. And of course, any kink, any fetish, the nature is that we can't really control that. We can't
Mhm.
decide what does or doesn't turn us on. If we could, it would make life and relationships a lot more simpler.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when did you know that you were going to go there? Because that might be one of the most disturbing and shocking parts of the entire book. I mean, it's difficult to pick what's the most shocking part of a book that contains many shocking parts, but it has to be a contender.
Thank you. Yeah, I always knew that I wanted this book to be really dark, very twisted, very transgressive, very confrontational and in your face. So to me, it felt very organic, and I was so worried about that particular section of text because it's quite a considerable amount of pages in the book. It's quite a tangent. And when I submitted the manuscript to Blackstone, I pretty much thought like I was preparing for them to come back and be like, we have to cut this. And it's interesting because they actually did cut a few things from the book that were a little too graphic toward the end of the story, and we did end up trimming some of that. And if that'll tell you anything, if you've read the book, you'll wonder what the hell could he have cut that would be more graphic than what was in the book.
Can we
Um,
jump into that right now?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What
Um,
did they cut?
they cut a few scenes toward the end that more described the assault with can we go into spoiler territory or
Yeah, yeah. So another
okay.
note: spoilers are about to happen.
Yeah, we cut a lot of text that had to do with the assault with Jinx and Ashley's son. There were a lot of like very visceral physical descriptions of what he did to Bailey that we just had to cut because there comes a point if a character does something, they are irredeemable in a reader's eye. And Jinx probably is already a bit irredeemable to many readers, but it's a line that is very difficult to come back from if you cross it. And Blackstone told me unequivocally that they wanted to send this book out as far and as wide as possible. And because of that, they wanted it to be a little bit more digestible, I guess is what you could say, a little bit less, not because it is a transgressive book, but they didn't want it to be like too much. And it's a fine line. Like it's a very fine line between what is tasteful and then what is considered obscene or indecent. So there was a whole section of Bailey's assault that was described that we cut, and then there was actually another story toward the end of the novel that Jinx tells Ashley, that involves um, the I'm just going to say it. It involves the mutilation of a child's genitals, and it was incredibly graphic, very very visceral, and my editor and the publicist at Blackstone was like, "We can't have this in the book. We just can't have it in the book." And I get that. I totally understand. I mean, there are certain things that you have to work on with a publisher when they approach you to collaborate on something. Like, it's no longer, if you're self-publishing, you can do whatever you want, but when you're working with a press and it's a team effort, not that self-publishing isn't a team effort, because self-publishing, you have like your interior designer, you have your cover artist, you have all the people that blurb the book, but like when you have the company behind you, like a machine like Blackstone, you really have to take into consideration what they say and what they think is going to fly and what's not going to fly. And there were just those scenes toward the end of the book that were just way too much and too to just cross too many lines. And it definitely depressed me to cut that material, because I thought it spoke to the depravity of Ashley. It spoke to the violence of Jinx, how enamored he is with violence, how much he kind of romanticizes brutality and fetishizes that. I thought it corresponded a lot with like the kink of terminal illness. Um, I thought it worked, and it did probably work, but the publisher just wanted to cut that material. So I understand, but I mean, maybe there will come a time when we publish the unedited version, like, 20, 25 years from now, um, when it's in like a new printing or whatever. But for now, I am actually very happy that we decided to go the way we went with this book, because I feel like if we had included some of that material, I feel like we would have lost more readers with what we presented in those sections, if you know what I mean. Like, I feel like people who were on the fence about the book and giving it like, maybe, oh, I'll give it a 3 or a 3.5 star rating, they would have given it like a 2 or a 1. you know so and we wouldn't have been able to send it as wide as possible. Like, Blackstone has really great relationships with a lot of indie bookstores and a lot of like Barnes and Noble stores. So we wanted to get it in front of as many eyes as possible. And because of that, you have to make certain sacrifices, which I totally understand. I mean, it's part of the business, but it's definitely like a process of killing your darlings, which is never fun.
Yeah, I always think, as you've alluded to, that just because we cut something from one edition, it doesn't mean, it's cut from all editions. There may come a time where those scenes are in a subsequent version of the book.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if Lars von Trier somehow made it into a film, he'd be like, no, no, give me the genital mutilation scene.
Yeah,
That's what I want. That's what I want to include. And
exactly.
goodness, from what Chuck has said previously, I'm sure if Chuck Palahniuk, I should say, seeing as there's also famous Chuck Wendig,
Mhm.
Chuck Palahniuk would probably be like, okay, well, I'll cut that, but there's a danger that what I replace it with, you're gonna wish that I was keeping that one.
Yep.
And I mean, that kind of brings us quite nicely. You spoke about Paulanik being an influence and someone who you're a great fan of in general. And to take it back to nested stories, I mean, in a way, at least in terms of the format, there was a bit of At Dark I Become Loathsome that reminded me of Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk,
Yeah.
because you've got this main story following Ashley and then later involving Jinx, but you're telling us so many short stories within it. I mean, there's the story with Mr. Cavalier, which is great because there are so many twists to that. And there's a very short piece, but very effective, involving a granddaughter who temporarily dies and goes to heaven. And goodness, when I was reading that was the Chuck Palahniuk story right there, particularly the way that it ends. It just reminded me of so many of the things that we've seen him do before. And so really you've almost found this sheet where you're able to write short stories and write a novel
Mhm.
or novella. I'm not sure which this is. It's very much on the
We're
cusp.
calling it a novel for all
Okay.
intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many words is it?
Almost 50,000?
It's a novel.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but you've managed to kind of write a novel and short stories simultaneously. Was that something you always intended to do? And of these short stories nested within, did you write them all specifically for this book, or had you had some of these previously, or you'd had these ideas and you thought, right, this is going in this one?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I've kind of developed this style now of being able to write short stories within the larger narratives of what I'm writing because I love a short story. I love short fiction in general. Like, it just really excites me. It's where I started writing fiction. I just love short formats of telling stories. It seems like a true test of an author's ability to be able to tell something coherently and concisely in a short amount of words, tell something that's compelling and exciting and, like, surprising, all of those things. It's really, really wonderful to be able to see that, to experience it. So the stories, the tangents that I go on in this book, felt really organic to me when I was crafting them, because they were obviously crafted specifically for this book. I had the concept of terminal illness as a kink for, like, quite some time, but to me, it didn't seem like something I would be able to write, like, an entire book about. And when I was piecing together the narrative structure of what I wanted A Dark I Become Loathsome to be, I thought, the one thing that Ashley's obsessed with is this blog. And I thought this is like the perfect sort of portal, the entry point for this other idea that I've been kind of like brewing for a little while. And it just seemed like a really perfect place to kind of insert that, and write that tangent in this narrative. And then of course there's the tangent with that Jinx, the story that Jinx tells Ashley in the chat room that kind of causes Ashley to become really enamored and interested in Jinx in general. The story with Mace Cavalier. Yeah, and that was written specifically for this piece. But I think those little tangents that I go on. First of all, I love when characters tell stories to other characters in a larger narrative. I think that's really just clever, and I'm a sucker for that. Um, but it kind of feeds my addiction of the shorter format and almost treating something like a very small section of a larger body of work. It's almost like more easy to digest than looking at an entire novel. I kind of like to look at novels like little short stories each chapter. Each chapter I go through is like a little short story. And that makes it doable for me because if I look at the entire big picture, it's just like so overwhelming. So that being said, I kind of view each chapter as like a little short story, a little short tangent that I go on. And these stories in particular, I'm really, really proud of them. I think that they're really excellent tangents that the characters either obsess over or are told. Um, and I think, you know, they work thematically with the ideas and concepts that I'm trying to play with here about like our obsession with death, Ashley's obsession with death more specifically, the grief that he is suffering from, um, that maybe even like the love that he feels for his late wife, and the hope of being reunited with his young son who disappeared. Um, so that being said, you know, those pieces, those tangents in the story, I feel like they do serve a larger purpose, and they were definitely influenced by Chuck Palahniuk's Haunted. Like that's one of my favorite books of all time. So I definitely look to that book for a lot of inspiration, and a lot like even my Burnt Sparrow trilogy that's coming out in September this year, like it incorporates other little tangents in the larger narrative, and that's a much longer book. Like that book is almost 80,000 words. So it's definitely like the longest thing I've written so far, and um, characters tell one another stories, um, and you know we get the story through like diary entries and newspaper articles. So I love playing with like formats. I love playing with like different sort of formats to tell a story, and I've always loved doing that, like especially in Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and You've Lost a Lot of Blood. Like I've always really liked manipulating formats and treating things as if they were like primary sources for something that actually happened. I think that's really disturbing and unsettling to kind of, and it's very voyeuristic in a lot of ways. Like it makes you feel like you're reading something that's forbidden, that like you shouldn't be reading, but you can't stop yourself from reading.
Yeah, I think the entire book has a kind of forbidden literature, forbidden piece about it. And I mean, even early on, I felt like you were kind of breaking the fourth wall because you say, if you're reading this, you've likely thought that the world would be a better place without you.
Right.
Now, given the type of people, I suppose, that are attracted to dark fiction and how kind of thoughtful we can be about our place within the world and in humanity, that's got to apply to probably 90% plus of your readers, I would say. So,
I would say so. I mean, like this book is very much like a love letter to the outcasts, like the freaks, the people who feel like the way I felt growing up in a small, isolated little town in northwest corner of Connecticut, like very rural Connecticut. Um, I felt I felt like a freak. I felt like everybody, you know, as a queer kid with like kind of overly feminine characteristics, like people knew about me before I even like said my name to them. You know, people knew about they thought they knew me before they even met me. And it's difficult to operate like that and be a child in kind of a hostile environment like that. And this book really speaks to those outcasts, those people who feel different and feel like people are judging them constantly and feel like they're disenfranchised and completely disillusioned with the world. And um you know, I think I maybe do break the fourth wall a little bit with this book, and I'm directly addressing a lot of the people, a lot of the outcasts that I feel like would benefit from reading something like this. I always say that I want to write the books that I wish I could have read like at a younger age. And this feels to me like a book I would have loved to read, you know, at like 16 or 17. It would have been really powerful to me.
Hmm. It captures a lot of the early splatterpunk because, especially because if you look at the actual what that word means, it's more of the punk.
Yeah.
the outcast, the misfit, the fringes of society.
Yeah.
And so and it's incredibly transgressive. Um and I think it's shifted to a more modern sensibility, because I think some of the early spider punks, they had like a clear defined what you would call someone as a protagonist, but now we have a character who is, who could be a protagonist, he could be an antagonist. It's morally gray. And so it's splatterpunk with modern sensibilities, um, kind of lean into a little bit more Norrish type thing, but it's definitely in that vein, and I like that.
Thank you.
I want to see more of it.
I
You know.
know. I feel the same way. I grew up reading a lot of the splatter punks, like I mentioned, like Clive Barker and Poppy Z. Bright. Kathy Koja is another one that I look to a lot for inspiration. Um, yeah, I think splatterpunk is definitely an appropriate descriptor for this book, but it definitely has those modern sensibilities too. Um,
hmm
and it has like kind of like a neo gothic almost feel to it, with
hmm
like the way in which it's kind of like a purging of all your emotions while you're reading it, which is what gothic fiction I feel like does so expertly.
No, definitely.
It's interesting that you brought up splatterpunk because while I was reading it, and one of the reasons that I would say this is a genre redefining book, much like Incidents Around the House, I don't, there's something splatterpunk about it, but it's not quite splatterpunk. So I feel you've almost created a new genre, and I'm having difficulty articulating what that is exactly, because to call it transgressive splatterpunk would then be enormously disparaging to every single splatterpunk book that has come
Right.
before it. But there's just something a little bit different. It's like this is a new genre now. I don't know what to call it. And it's
Yeah.
brilliant and I love it and I want more.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like my work is following this kind of vein of like splatterpunk, with stories following kind of miscreants on the fringes of society. Like even my Burnt Sparrow trilogy follows a one character in particular who feels very much like on the outside of polite society. And I feel, yeah, I think I've read so much splatterpunk, but I'm interested in bringing new flavor to it and bringing like a new definition, new kind of enhancements to it. It's kind of like when you play jazz music. Like I listened to someone talk about playing like the old jazz standards, and they said, when you play jazz, you want to honor the people who played before you and like brought this into the culture and made it what it is now. But in doing that, you also want to bring new flavor to it and bring like something that is uniquely you to the conversation as well. And I feel like, I hope at least, I hope this book kind of does that with splatterpunk, in that it honors the writers, the amazing artists who came before, but it also brings this new sort of edge to it that maybe wasn't in the original movement, and is kind of redefining what it could be and what splatterpunk could be in the future. Um, I don't know. I'm interested to see where it falls with people, but a lot of people have already, from what I've seen in like some early reviews, a lot of people have referred to it as splatterpunk. Um, so I'm interested to see how people continue to react to it, and where it continues to fall with people and how they perceive it.
Hmm. It's interesting that you brought up jazz, because I was reading something about Miles Davis, who really didn't think of what he did as jazz. He thought of it as music, and probably leaned a little bit more to rock, or what we would call fusion. and it's like it's a good analogy for like what you're doing here with this book. It's not spider punk. It's a story, but at the same time it is, and it's like it the definition won't hold. It's like
Mm,
it's too turbulent to hold the definition,
yeah.
and that's would I would go as far as saying it's LaRockian.
Yeah. I
I
love
mean
that.
that's it's a brand. You have this flair, this style that we're gonna we have Cronenbergian, Lynchian, I guess you would say LaRockian, or
I
would it
I
be
think we should find that.
LaRocca esque? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think LaRockian sounds better.
LaRockian, I like that.
Yeah,
I think it works
yeah,
perfectly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, whatever we call it, we know that it is fiction that will make you feel something and will sometimes hurt you, but sometimes you're gonna like it.
Yeah. You're gonna be into it.
Yeah, yeah. It'll hurt you, but you'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, goodness, where to go from here? I mean, the ritual itself, you said that it was inspired from something you read that happened in a country in Asia. Do
Yes.
you recall which country? I feel that like I've heard of this happening and possibly in Thailand, but I'm not sure.
I think it could have been Thailand. I do remember it was an article. If I ever find the article again, I'll send it to you, Michael. It was, I believe, through Vice or ID, and it was all about this organization that had developed by people who were trying to kind of like what Ashley's motives were in this book, to kind of illustrate the importance of life and how wonderful it is to be alive to people who wanted to have this sort of like transformative rebirth experience. Um, and I thought it was fascinating, and I thought that's a really interesting entry point for a character. Um, I thought it would be a really interesting character study to kind of explore his motivations for why he does this, and then how his motivations change halfway through. Uh, how his mental state sort of begins to decay because of his like break from reality, because he undergoes so much trauma in such a short period of time. And I'll tell you what, there's actually an amazing film from Czechoslovakia from 1969 called The Cremator, and it it was also a huge influence for me while writing this piece. It's all a an analogy for what happened in Germany in the 1940s with the Holocaust, and how people in Germany became so susceptible to people in power, and how they just sort of followed suit in order to satisfy, just the status quo and the norm. And it's all about this cremator who decides he's going to purify the world by burning everyone alive, and it's about his plan to go about doing this. It's a brilliant, brilliant film, and was like very much an inspiration while I was writing this piece. And it's funny, a lot of the places that I look, like IMDb for this film, they label it as like a comedy, comedy slash drama slash horror. And it's funny you had said that this book, At Dark I Become Loathsome, kind of denies categorization, and that film too kind of denies categorization. It's very, very difficult to define what that movie is. And that's kind of the art that I love to encounter and to ingest. Like, I love art that is very hard, difficult to categorize. Um, I think it's really fun to kind of play around with that and explore all the possibilities. There's so many films like that. There's also a really brilliant film. It wasn't so much an inspiration for this book, but I'm just going off on a tangent now, called Taxidermia, which is a brilliant Hungarian film from 2006 that's about three generations of men from the same family. One of them is a like farmer slash, I think he's like a soldier at one point, and he's like very interested in like disturbing kinks. So I guess in some way it did influence this book with regard to like the kink aspect. And then the second person is this obese speed eater. And then the third character that we follow in Taxidermia is an embalmer. So it's really fascinating, but it's also very hard to summarize and categorize that film. It's like part comedy, part surreal, part horror, just very transgressive. And I mean, those are the films like The Cremator and Taxidermia and like Antichrist by Lars von Trier. Those are the films that I look to a lot when I'm crafting what I want to create and like how I want the work to be perceived. I want it to be divisive. I want it to be polarizing. I don't want people to be able to categorize it too neatly, you know.
Yeah, and Antichrist by Lars von Trier. I may have mentioned this to you before, in fact, but it will always have a special place in my heart. And the first time that I saw it, it was at a cinema that was located in central Birmingham, so the second biggest city in the UK. I literally must have seen it at about midnight. And so after watching it, and it may have even just been me and my friend in this cinema. And then when we came out, because it was like a Saturday night at about 2 or 3 a.m., you just had all these drunk people that had been clubbing, and it was just such a surreal combination of
Yeah.
experiences. It's like I've just been affected by trauma and misery and this bleak but somehow beautifully done piece of art. And I'm now having to navigate my way through a street of almost zombies and stop anyone either being sick on me or trying to fight me. And it was just
Right.
such
Yeah.
a paradox, and really highlighted how surreal and bizarre life can be.
Life can be pretty surreal and bizarre. Yeah, and I feel like that's part of the crux of At Dark I Become Loathsome is like life is traumatic and it's bizarre and difficult. It's difficult to categorize how we sometimes feel about life. But I think at the end of the book, I feel like there is like even though, well, I'm not gonna get into spoiler territory. I feel like there's like a teeny bit of hope, even though like a lot of horrible things happen, but like there is some hopefulness that Ashley will change and, you know, uh become a better person, hopefully. Not that he was a bad person to begin with. He just, I don't like to assign like good and evil with my characters too outright.
There is a glimmer of hope for a couple of reasons, neither of which I can state without completely
Yeah, we don't have to
spoiling the
go there.
book. But I definitely see what you mean. And I think both in terms of, let's say, the switch in Ashley's thinking and also the conclusion of the story, they are what we need for a good ending, a good twist, a good book. And that is, as Bob always says, they are logical, but
Right.
they are unpredictable. And that is exactly what you have done here. And yeah, I can't wait to see how people react. And I know that there will be a multitude of reactions. There are going to be people who get it, who love it, who say it is your best work yet. I believe Mr. Paul Tremblay said that. So
Yes.
shout out to Paul.
Shout
And
out
there
to
will be
Paul.
others who are probably angry about it, or they didn't quite get it, or maybe they did get it and they're still angry about it. And this is a good place to be for art. You want controversial art. You want art that affects people, and you sure as hell have got it.
Thank you. I mean, that's the motivation for me to sit down at the computer and write and create. I don't think too much about my audience when I'm writing because I want to write what's in my heart, and I want to write the books that I want to read and that I want to see in the world. But if I do think a little bit about audience and reaction, I think especially about how I want people to have like a visceral reaction to the work. I want them to have some sort of reaction that causes them to feel something. You know, the worst thing that you can do as an artist is release something and people are apathetic about it. They're like indifferent. Um, but if you release something that is daring and provocative and brutal, which I hope this book is, I hope it's all those things, you know, I feel like you'll create that divisive, really polarizing reaction. And that's what I love. Like, I love the films that have those really polarizing reactions. Like, Antichrist is definitely one of them. There are people that absolutely despise that movie, there are people that like adore it. I'm definitely in the camp of loving that film. It's one of my favorite films. Or even a film like a Serbian film, or Mother by Darren Aronofsky. You know, those are films that really test people's endurance and, you know, challenge people, challenge the viewer. There are books like that too. I mean, Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright comes to mind. That is a brutal book, but also so poetically, beautifully written. Um, but there are people that absolutely despise that book, just as there are people that, you know, glorify it and love it. Um, so when I create my art, I really do want some reaction, like good or bad. That's what really moves me as an artist.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there was something that I noticed that came up in a couple of reviews that I disagreed with, and obviously anyone's view is their interpretation, is their takeaway. So I just wanted to kind of talk about there were some people who said they felt that the it was a little bit against piercing culture and
Yeah.
body modification, and
Mhm.
okay, if you took that away then that's your interpretation. Completely wasn't my interpretation. And even though I don't have any visible piercings right now, like I used to have a lot of visible piercings, I still have a number of, I guess, not so visible piercings. And I don't like, look, certainly Eric as the artist, he is definitely not the enemy to alternative and piercing and body modification culture. You stand up for the outcast, for the outsider, for the alt community.
Yeah.
But even in terms of Ashley and in terms of the protagonist, like I didn't think he was ever saying, piercings in and of themselves are ugly. I felt his act to pierce himself was to almost a punishment, and almost to try and
Yeah.
reflect who he saw
On the inside.
himself
Yeah.
as. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I I think as well there's so many reasons why people get piercings. I mean, a lot of the time it's to make yourself more beautiful. It's to complement. It's like an aesthetic choice in that you want to mirror who you are. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I just didn't
I
feel that you were being anti piercing, and this is coming out clumsily, but.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
it
I
felt like it's worthy of discussion.
totally. I've seen a few of those reviews, and I was a little baffled by them at first. I never saw Ashley as a member of the body mod community, you know, a someone who goes willingly into that community of people and celebrates himself and the art of piercing himself and redefining his whole body through implants and piercings and surgical modifications. That's not him. He's not a mouthpiece for that community. Um, it is very much like you said, like he is punishing himself in a lot of ways. He's coming to terms with his trauma. He's coming to terms with all the pain and suffering that he's endured in such a short period of time. And I think the main crux of the book is, just because we think we're monstrous doesn't mean we're actually vile and loathsome. And that's what Ashley needs to learn throughout the course of the narrative. But he's so filled with this self-loathing and this hatred toward himself that he feels the only way he can punish himself is through these piercings. And, you know, he was once a painter, he was once an artist, and now he kind of views his body as his canvas, his way of expressing himself. He has no desire to paint really or be creative again. Um, so there's a sadness to his motivation for the body modification that he goes through, but I never once viewed it as like him speaking on behalf of the entire body modification community and saying, like, you know, piercings make you a bad person. um Ashley, you know, I don't feel that way. I don't think Ashley feels that way as a character. Ashley just thinks he's a bad person in general. And the piercings are incidental. They're just a way of coping with what he's going through.
Hmm. I felt like it was a form of scarification. I mean, he's doing resurrection rituals for transformation. He felt that this scarification was using his body, destroying his body as a canvas.
Hmm.
That's the way I saw it. There's with self-loathing, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of hurt. I mean, immediately, I cut myself just to see if I would feel, hurt comes to mind. Um, and so it's I thought it was a way of him doing like a personal transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely a personal transformation for him, and it's not
Hmm.
directed at an entire community. And I get very frustrated sometimes with people that, you know, read horror and think that because one character says or does something, it means that the author feels this way, or that even the character feels this way, and, you know, uh, that the character is against XYZ. Um, or, you know, even worse, the author is against or for
Hmm.
whatever. It's not always that black and white. It's more complex than that. And sometimes it feels like people just kind of pick up sound bites and they think, oh, this might get me clicks, this might get me more views if I kind of glom onto this. You know, that being said, I think obviously everyone's entitled to their opinion, but it should be an informed opinion. I think,
Hmm.
you know, really we should think more critically about what we're reading and what we're digesting. And I think there's a tendency to just read, review, and not really think too much about what we're putting into our bodies and what's coming back out. Um, but like I said, I don't view Ashley as like a spokesperson for like the entire body mod community. Um,
Hmm.
but if that's the way people feel, that's the way they feel. I can't control it. I just I'm baffled when I see that criticism. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Hmm.
Yeah, to me, I just felt there was almost a nod towards Pinhead and another kind of Barker
Yeah,
connection there too.
yeah, definitely Barker influenced for sure.
And I mean, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask a couple of questions about burnt sparrows and about Wretch, although I hope that we will be able to chat with you, when they come out and really get into them.
Sure.
But in terms of Wretch, so as you said, up until this point, your titles are almost short stories within themselves, and this time you've gone for one word.
Yep.
What inspired this, and was it your idea to go for a one word title, or did Saga have some input?
To be truthful, it was a little bit more Saga than it was my decision. I'm working with a brilliant editor at Saga, Tim O'Connell, who is just a remarkable person, really amazing, kind hearted, wonderful editor. He really understands horror fiction, just speculative fiction in general. He's brilliant. That being said, he really wants to frame this novel that I have with Saga as almost like a relaunch or like a rebranding of my whole oeuvre. Um, he wants it to be like kind of almost like a clean slate, like a fresh start. And by doing that, he thought that like a one word sort of like iconic word title would be the best thing to kind of signify my transition from the wordy sort of baroque titles to this more like refined one word title game that I'm going to be hopefully doing if I sign more books with Saga, which I hope I do, because I love Saga and I would really love to keep working with them. So it was really Tim's input for that, but obviously I decided what the title would be based on the book that I wrote. And Wretch to me felt like just such an interesting word to play with. And to my knowledge, like I looked, I don't think there's been a horror book or there probably has been some book with the title Wretch, but I don't think there's been a speculative fiction book with the title, and it seems like such an evocative image, like it conjures immediately, like someone like miserable and like a waif that's kind of like been discharged and like blown out to sea almost. It conjures that really dark, gloomy, unsettling image. And I'm excited. I think I obviously miss the more the wordier, baroque, poetic sounding titles, but I'm really interested to see how Saga breaks me out in a big way with Wretch when the time comes.
Do Saga have worldwide English language rights? Because we've seen something interesting with you, and we've seen it with other people like Josh Malaman, where they'll have one publisher for the American edition and then another for the UK. And I think in both your cases, like the UK one has been Titan. So I'm
Yeah,
wondering what the deal with Saga looks like.
yeah, for right now, they have worldwide rights. That being said, we are totally open to collaborating with like a UK publisher. Um, and yeah, no, the way the deal kind of worked out with between my agent and Saga when they first approached me about commissioning a novel, Tim kind of made it specific, whereas like he was like, we I need worldwide rights for this book. Um, and I don't know if that's typical. This is my first like big four, big five publishing deal, so I'm not sure if it's typical for them to take worldwide rights. Um, But that being said, like I said, we're definitely open to collaborating with a UK publisher at some point.
And then linked to that, Burnt Sparrows is a trilogy with Titan. So then, does Titan have worldwide rights for that one, or is
Yes.
that you? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they have worldwide rights to the Burnt Sparrow trilogy, like all three books. And that the first book comes out in September of this year, 2025, and we actually just kind of finalized the cover art for it, and it is so brilliant. It is such a departure from all the covers I've done previously. Uh, I think it's really going to surprise a lot of people, and it really captures beautifully the essence of the book. So much of the book revolves around gun violence in the United States and like mass shootings. Um, so the book speaks to that quite a bit, and the cover really exemplifies those themes and what I'm trying to convey with the story of this fictional small town in New Hampshire that is forever changed because of this horrific massacre that occurs on Christmas Day. So that being said, yes, Titan has the worldwide rights to it, and we're we're really excited to put it out, and hopefully I'll be able to do like a tour for it, maybe even tour the UK, and I think it's going to be brilliant. I'm just really looking forward to it.
Mhm. And considering the subject matter and how transgressive your writing is, that definitely leans into like the latter works of J.G. Ballard,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you, my credit card is hot right now. It's ready to go. So I'm really interested in checking out this trilogy.
I appreciate that. I'm a huge J.G. Ballard fan, and actually, J.G. Ballard was a huge influence for Loathsome in the respect of the cancer as like a kink, terminal illness as
Hmm.
a kink. You know,
Oh,
it felt
definitely,
it felt like some with his Crash. Like this book feels like my riff on Crash almost. You know,
definitely.
yeah,
I can now that you say that, you have solidified those inklings of my thoughts in my head. But yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just I'm way behind on my Ballard, and so I've been trying to catch up. And his later books, though, a lot of people say he rewrote the same book three times. But
yeah.
uh, okay, fine. If but you know,
A lot of
uh,
writers do that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I read Cocaine Nights last year, and that blew my mind.
Yeah,
Just and it's just so it's there's really nothing to the story. It's so fucked up. It's just
yeah,
how people change. It's just like God damn. Yeah.
yeah. No, there's definitely Ballard influence in At Dark I Become Loathsome, and especially um, Burnt Sparrow, the whole trilogy. It's very much like this world-spanning blight that kind of just covers the whole atmosphere of the story. And I mean, that's what Ballard did so magnificently, is just kind of discuss those things of um, you know the decay of society
Mm-hmm.
and the ways in which we brutalize and harm one another.
Oh
So
yeah.
Ballard's definitely a huge influence for both of these books.
Yeah, we spoke about before how it's difficult to classify your work in terms of a neat genre box, and it sounds like with the Burnt Sparrows trilogy, it might be just as hard. I mean, it sounds from what you've given us, it might be leaning a little bit away from horror and more a dark thriller with elements of crime and social commentary. Have you had any discussion with the team at Titan in terms of the marketing and where you're going to try and pitch it?
A little bit. I actually had a meeting with them earlier today about Burnt Sparrow, and we talked about the cover. We talked about where we're trying to target specific like reviews and trade outlets, all of that really fun stuff. Um, there's definitely a horror element to it, but there's also just like a dark literary fiction feel to it that is just it is almost in a way like unclassifiable. Like there are fantastical elements to it, but it's not fantasy. It's not really dark fantasy. There are horrific elements, but it's not like outright horror. It's an amalgamation of all those things because I'm a fan of all those things. Um, so it's really hard to categorize. I'm very, very interested to see how other authors react to it. We're, seeking blurbs for it right now, and Paul Tremblay wrote back with a really kind blurb, which was we were so appreciative of that. But I'm really interested to know how this other book, Burnt Sparrow, like I'm just very curious to know how it lands with people.
Well, we cannot wait to read it and to discuss it. So later this year, it's happening.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Well, thank you again for being so generous with your time and your knowledge. I want to know, do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners and viewers with?
Yes. Obviously, I'm so grateful to everybody listening that picks up my books or doesn't pick up my books. No worries. I'm just really grateful I'm in this position to be able to create art and have conversations with you. Um, it's just really, really special. And this book in particular, At Dark I Become Loathsome, I really want it to be like an exorcism for people. I want it to be something that sets people free and that people can resonate with it and respond to it, and it be the book that really challenges them, really disturbs them, and unsettles them, but also makes them feel like a little freer. So I hope this book speaks to you, um, and I'm just really excited to share it with everyone.
All right. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.